Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of the SWUS. Continuing on with Conference Championship Weekend. Georgia, Texas, SEC Championship Saturday evening, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Let's do it.
Welcome to the SWUS. The SWUS. SWUS. Hey, get the SWUS.
All right, like I said, we got Georgia, Texas here. Longhorns laying 2.5 points across the board. I see nothing but 2.5s. Total sitting at 49.5 across the board as well. So pretty set in stone here as far as the line in total. Let's take a look at the pie charts. And according to this data, action seems to be coming in on the Georgia side. Over 60% of the tickets, about 80% of the money. As I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So let's get into this one, and obviously we'll start with the Week 8 matchup. We've seen these two teams play. It was one of the biggest games of the year. Georgia went on the road to Texas and beat them pretty handedly, 30-15. I loved it. It was my favorite bet of the week. They were catching 5 points, I believe, and I took the points and the money line. So this is a great game for me personally. So can we expect a repeat performance here? So let's start with the Georgia offense. This is an offense that wants to throw the ball with Carson Beck. They're 20th in pass frequency so far this year. Carson Beck having it's not that it's a terrible year, but I think we were expecting more. He was one of the favorites to win the Heisman coming into the year. 12 interceptions, certainly not what they were looking for. Also, just to see big-time throw rate. I think we were expecting a lot more downfield throws here from Carson Beck. But his numbers aren't terrible on the year. He still has over 3,400 yards and 28 touchdowns, 7.8 yards per attempt. The problem is right here, the Texas pass defense. Look at their numbers against the pass this year. First in the country in yards per pass attempt allowed, third in success rate per dropback, first in effective pass. This defense is sitting at first in DFEI. I've said a number of times this year, if you subscribe to this channel, you've probably heard me say this a number of times. When it comes to this Texas team, I will co-sign the defense. I think it's one of the best defenses in the country. You can poke holes in the Texas offense, and we'll get to that in a second. But as far as the Texas defense goes, you will not see me sitting here criticizing it. I believe in the Texas defense. Like I said, I think it's one of the best defenses in the country. So this is a tough matchup here for Carson Beck and the Georgia offense, an offense that's trying to throw the ball against maybe the best pass defense in the NFL, in the FBS. And it showed in the Week 8 matchup. If you watch that game, you know it wasn't the Georgia offense that won. They won 30-15. The offense looked pretty bad. In that game, they had just 110 yards rushing, 3.93 yards per carry. Success rate per rush is under 38%. Look at the passing numbers. 4.3 yards per pass attempt, success rate per dropback under 29%. So I'm going to say it again. It was not the Georgia offense that won that game. In fact, Georgia's offense looked pretty bad in the game. It was Georgia's defense that won that game. And I mean, that wasn't an anomaly. Look at Texas numbers against the pass on the year. 5.2 yards per attempt, 33% success rate per dropback. They're allowing less than 144 passing yards per game. Nobody can throw the ball in this Texas defense. A huge reason for that is the pass rush. 8th in pressure rate, 8th in sack rate, 5th in pass rush grade. This is a very good pass rush. Now, you might look at the left side of this graphic and say, Kyle, but the Georgia offensive line is great in pass protection. You're not wrong, but in the Week 8 matchup, Texas defensive front was winning these battles. Carson Beck was pressured on 30.2% of his dropbacks in that game. He was the 32nd most pressured quarterback in college football that week. And check this out. In that game, when he was pressured, 4 of 12, 13 passing yards. 4 of 12, 13 passing yards, no touchdowns and interception, a 7.6 passer rating. So the Texas pass rush was definitely a huge factor in that Week 8 game. I mean, Carson Beck was terrible against that Texas pass rush. And that's kind of been a repeating pattern this entire season. You give Carson Beck a clean pocket, he can still kill you. But look at the right side of this graphic. When you put pressure on Carson Beck, he runs into problems. A D turnover-worthy play rate, a D yards per attempt. So this Texas pass rush, we saw them winning the battles back in Week 8. I expect them to win some battles in this one as well. I think Texas pass rush is a real concern here for Carson Beck. And if you're expecting Carson Beck to have run support in this game, I'm not sure about that. I mean, on the season, Texas is allowing 3.1 yards per carry, 40.3% success rate per rush. Georgia offensively against top 20 defenses, just 3.35 yards per carry. 44.1% success rate per rush actually isn't bad, but I don't think we can hang our hats on Georgia being able to run the ball in this game. Maybe a little bit, but Carson Beck's going to need to be the man in this one. And against that pass rush, I don't really trust it. I think it's a tough matchup for Carson Beck and this Georgia offense. But what about the matchup on the other side? Let's take a look at the Texas offense. This is pretty balanced. They're 75th in run frequency, 60th in pass frequency. Here's the matchup on paper. Obviously, this is the SEC championship game. We're going to be looking at mostly green on these graphics. Texas offensively, as I said before, not nearly as reliable as their defense, in my opinion. Still a great offense, though. 19th in yards per play, 26th in success rate against Georgia's defense that, I mean, this is not the normal Kirby Smart Georgia defense. It's kind of 2 years in a row now where the Georgia defense has fallen just short of what we're used to seeing. Usually we just see nothing but ones and twos here for Georgia. This year, 38th in yards per play, 36th in success rate. As I'm sure you already know if you watch the game, Texas offensively in week 8 against Georgia, they got absolutely bullied. The Texas offense was terrible in this game. This is why they lost the game right here. Their offense couldn't do anything. 29 yards rushing, 1.07 yards per carry, 1.07. Look at the passing numbers, 4.7 yards per attempt. Success rate per dropback was below 26%. So yeah, safe to say this Texas offense got absolutely rocked by Georgia's defense in their first matchup. We saw Quinn Ewers start the season off on an absolute rampage. It was looking like he had a good shot of winning the Heisman Trophy. Even when he got hurt, he was still in the running. But he's fallen off in a major way. On the season, I mean, 7.6 yards per attempt, just over 2,300 yards, C- big time throw rate, B- turnover worthy play rate. Not that these numbers are bad, but if you take into consideration the start that he got off to the beginning of the season, he was on an absolute warpath. He's definitely fallen off a bit. Here are the numbers right here. The first 5 games for Texas, 322 passing yards per game, over 10 yards per attempt, over 53% success rate per dropback. Rushing numbers, also elite. Over 191 rushing yards per game, over 5 yards per carry, almost 52% success rate per rush. Through 5 games, this offense was looking unstoppable. Yes, you have to take into consideration the competition. Colorado State, you had Michigan in there in the big house. That's a legitimate one. UTSA, Louisiana Monroe, and Mississippi State. So they played some really weak competition to start the season. In their last 7 games, now that we've gotten into SEC play, we saw this offense come crashing back down to earth. I mean, not that these numbers are absolutely terrible, but they're not even close to the numbers we were seeing from Texas offense through those first 5 games. So we're starting to see that this Texas offense isn't all that elite. It's definitely vulnerable. But here's the thing when it comes to Georgia's defense. Check this out. So as we already talked about, they absolutely blanked Texas. Texas couldn't do anything against Georgia back in week 8. But the other 2 times, they played 3 games against top 20 passing attacks this year. Texas is one of them. Their other 2 games against top 20 passing attacks, that was Alabama and Ole Miss, Georgia got absolutely cooked. Over 318 passing yards allowed per game, over 10.3 yards per attempt. Success rate per dropback almost up at 60%. So, what does this show us? Does this show us that the Texas game was an outlier for Georgia and we can't trust them against elite passing attacks? Or does this show us that the Texas passing attack doesn't belong in the same discussion as Alabama and Ole Miss? Texas is in the top 20 in terms of passing attacks. Do they not belong there? There's 2 ways to take this. You could say, hey, that Texas game is an outlier. Georgia's pass defense can't be trusted against elite passing attacks. Texas should go off here. You can also look at it and say, Texas is not a top 20 passing attack. So there's kind of 2 different ways to analyze this data. My personal opinion, whenever I come to, let's say, a fork in the road when I'm looking at numbers like this, the answer tends to be in the middle. So maybe the Texas game was a little bit of an outlier and Georgia's pass defense is vulnerable to elite passing attacks. And also maybe Texas passing attack might not be quite on the level of Alabama and Ole Miss. Usually the answer is somewhere in the middle. I do think Texas will be able to perform better than this. I mean, this was terrible. 4.7 yards per attempt. I definitely think they'll be better than that. Now, what about the Texas run game? Will the Longhorns be able to run the ball in this game? Obviously, we know they were not able to run the ball in the week 8 matchup, 1.07 yards per carry. We have seen Georgia's defensive front look pretty vulnerable in their last 2 games. UMass was running on them, and then Georgia Tech was running all over them. In their last 2 games, 5.59 yards per carry allowed, 243 rushing yards allowed per game, 49% success rate per rush. That's pretty terrible against Georgia Tech and UMass. That being said, this run defense was looking pretty solid through their first 10 games, 3.53 yards per carry, 37% success rate per rush. Not really sure what to do with that, but check this out. This Texas offense seems to be figuring it out a bit in terms of running the football. In their last 4 games, who, by the way, were against solid defenses. Florida, Arkansas's defensive front's been great this year. Kentucky, solid defense. Texas A&M, great defense. So in their last 4 games, against good defenses, they're averaging over 5.1 yards per carry, over 51% success rate per rush, over 210 rushing yards per game. So Texas seems to have figured it out in terms of running the football. We've seen Georgia's defensive front look vulnerable against the run in their last 2 games. Is Texas going to have run support for Quinn Ewers in this game? And if that's the case, that lifts a huge weight off his shoulders of trying to beat this Georgia defense by himself. I think Texas offense is going to look much better in this one than we saw in the Week 8 offense. I don't necessarily hate the matchup for Texas offensively. I mean, it's the SEC championship. It's Georgia. Obviously, that defense is going to come to play. Kirby Smart definitely knows what he's doing. This is not his first time. So that Georgia defense is going to be ready, but I don't hate the matchup for Texas offensively. I think they're going to move the ball in this game, which is why I'm on Texas here. I can't believe I'm saying this. First glance, I was like, Georgia's underdogs? Let's take it. Georgia, blind. But now that I've taken a look at it, I think Texas is trending in the right direction. I like how they're running the ball under a field goal. I'm taking Texas here. Texas minus 2.5. This one's ugly. Everyone's going to hate this one. Give me the Longhorns. Texas minus 2.5. If you'd like to see all the bets I currently have open, head over to KyleKirms.com and click on Open Bets. Also gives you access to the Discord and all that. So head over to the website if you're interested. Be sure to check out the live shows. We got the 4 p.m. Eastern time in the weekdays, the midnight show for college basketball, all that. So check that out if you're interested. Let's have ourselves a great conference championship weekend. Be sure to bet responsibly. Hit me up in the Discord if you need anything.